This video is for Thursday, August the 20th, 2020. We learned yesterday that all continents, with the exception of Antarctica, had people who were alive more than 1,000 years BC. We learned about Indians, we learned about Chinese, we learned about Japanese. Today we're going to start with Africa. Now there are those who believe that Africa has the oldest human remains known to man. There are those who say no, that distinction goes to Asia. We'll never really know the true story because so much of African history was destroyed in a series of constant civil wars that began in the 15th century. That would be the 1400s. What we do know is there are fragments of artifacts that can be found in what are left of African cities. Africa is one of the most diverse continents on this planet. We have deserts in the extreme north and south. We have volcanic mountains that are erupting to this day. We have great rivers caused by tropical rains, and we have a depression, which in geological terms is called a rift, R-I-F-T. This is caused by the continent of Africa being pulled apart. It is in this rift valley where anthropologists have found the oldest bones known for mankind. They are usually referred to as humanoids. Here is a map of Africa. Now, if you look on the right side, the eastern side, you'll see a series of lakes. And these lakes are caused by one part of Africa being pulled apart from another part of Africa. On the northernmost part of Africa, we see the Nile River. Now we're going to spend a considerable amount of time talking about the Egyptians next week. African civilizations revolved around clans of people. Archaeologists tell us that the climate dictated what was grown, and if these clans were stationary or these clans were nomadic. Anthropologists believe that African clans were spiritual. They believed that one's ancestors inhabited the earth. Now, of course, we don't really know because a lot of this that was written down was destroyed during the African Civil Wars. It's hard to write about the language. Most anthropologists believe that many of the clans had a written language, but clans also had storytellers who would tell a tale from one generation to another. The spoken language that each clan had became convoluted or mixed up because of the civil wars. Clans from one group would be mixed in with clans of the other, and it was hard to tell which was the dominant language. About the only thing we can say with certainty are the Kush people. Now the Kush people are found where the blue and the white Nile come together to form the Nile. It was Egyptian scribes who wrote about the interaction between the Kush and the Egyptians. If one was to take out their Old Testament of our Bible, we could hear about the Kush when we read about the exploits of Moses. Europe. Most of our history that we are going to follow in this course comes from Europe. We are going to concern ourselves with the tribes that would eventually turn into Greeks and Romans. Now we know that ancient man drew pictures in caves in what is now France and Germany. These drawings showed that Europe was much more forested and much richer in wildlife than it is today. We believe that one of the reasons why Rome was able to score such impressive victories was because many of the clans north of Rome were Neolithic. Now, Neolithic means to use stone. It was iron that was adopted by the tribes that saw how successful the Romans were. That is why around 300 and 400 AD, the Romans were finally decimated by these Germanic tribes. Europeans were mostly polytheistic. They had many gods, and many of their artifacts were taken over and taken back to Rome. Government was most likely strongman. The person who is the strongest will be the ruler. And if you believe that you are stronger than that person, then you challenge them to a fight, and God will decide who is the most powerful. Mesoamerica is a term where we use for North and South America combined. Now, we do not find any human bones before 10,000 BC. Now, we believe that prior to 10,000 BC, there were no humans on either North or South America. We know that in 10,000 BC, there was a mini ice age. And in this mini ice age, Orientals are going to walk from various parts across what is now the Bering Sea into North America. The ice melted, and these Native Americans were stuck first in North America and then in South America. Many of the civilizations of these Native Americans are going to form around lakes, rivers, and the ocean. Now, I would like for us to concentrate on the Mississippian culture. Now, the Mississippian culture is going to revolve around trade along what is now the Mississippi River. If you were to go to the eastern part of St. Louis on the Illinois side, you would come to a city called Cahokia. Now, Cahokia is where a great mound was built. Now, we believe that the top section of the mound was built for spiritual purposes as well as astrological signs of the moon and the sun emplacement. The lower sections were used for commerce. So as archaeologists have dug into these mounds, they have discovered arrowheads that come from the Rocky Mountains. They have discovered seashells that can only be found in the Atlantic region. Here is a map of North America, and you can see the great Mississippi River drawn in it. Now, about halfway up the Mississippi River would be Cahokia, Illinois. Native Americans in North America had no written language. They instead were to take their stories and tell them to people who would then tell the tale to youngsters. And of course, when the youngsters became older, they would tell the tales to their youngsters. Now, the Mississippian culture was built around wooden homes and grew crops. If you were to go to Westphalia, Missouri, just a little bit just a little bit west and south of Westphalia is Painted Rock Natural Resource Area. It is here that members of the Mississippian culture, called the Osage Indians, are going to build their homes. If one was to go down Highway 94, when you get close to Portland, there are examples of Mississippian culture homes that were built on the flat Missouri bottoms. Less is known about the Native Americans in South America. Most of the culture was destroyed by either the Spanish or the Portuguese in the 16th century. Now, if you look at this map of South America, you will see the Andes Mountains. And there will be Indian tribes that will develop on the western side of the Andes, and Indian tribes that will develop on the eastern side of the Andes. The river that you see is the Amazon. It is the longest river in the world. It has the greatest volume. There are still people who live along the Amazon, which anthropologists and archaeologists tell us have never been with Europeans. The most advanced cultures found between the Pacific and the Andes Mountains. Most of these cultural artifacts were destroyed, and many of them carried back to Spain. We believe that along the Amazon there are still people who have had little contact with the Western world. The Amazon is still an unexplored region. So what we know the most about are the people who inhabited the Middle East. These are the people who would give their culture to the Greeks. And the Greeks would give their culture to the Romans. And the Romans would give their culture to the conquering Europeans, who by the 15th century would spread European culture to Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Sorry about that. Let's get to the right one. For our purposes, of all the cultures in the Middle East, we are only going to talk about 4. We are going to talk about the Mesopotamians. The Mesopotamians are those people who lived on either the Tigris or the Euphrates River. We're going to look at the Egyptians. The Egyptians are going to make their homeland along the Nile River. Israel. Now I'm using the modern day name of the country of Israel. It went through several name changes back before 1000 BC. But these were people who lived along the Jordan River or along the Mediterranean Sea. And finally, along the coast of what is Syria and Turkey today. Well, what am I going to ask you to put into your notes? You're going to have to find the location on a map, and you should have a map of the Middle East. You need to know what type of government we have for the Mesopotamians, for the Egyptians, for the Israelis, for those who lived along the countries of Turkey and Syria. What type of religion did they have? What type of writing and arithmetic did they use? And when I say existence of culture, I'm talking about art. Pictures they may have painted, sculptures they may have sculpted. Now, here is our map of the ancient world. And you can see on the right side, you can see the Tigris and Euphrates River. On the left side, you can see the Nile River. In the middle, you can see the Jordan River, which starts at the Sea of Galilee and ends at the Dead Sea. Now, I think the chances of you seeing this map on a quiz is 100%. So for sure, I would want to know where the various rivers are, because it's easiest to place the cultures next to the rivers. Here is a modern day map of Mesopotamia. You can see the Euphrates River to the south and the Tigris River to the north. Now please make sure that you know which one is the Tigris and which one is the Euphrates. Every year when I put this on a quiz, I have people who get them backwards. Now you can see where several of the civilizations are marked on this map. The Assyrians, the Sumerians, and the Akkadians. You can also see that along these rivers there's a great deal of produce that is going to be grown. The earliest civilizations were built around what we call city-states. Now, a city-state would be a small town that would have a leader. And the leader would ask his followers to study the stars. The feeling was that the stars told us what the gods were thinking. Now, the gods were polytheistic. There were many gods. And so whether we're talking about the Assyrians or the Sumerians or the Akkadians, each one of them had their gods. And when a god appeared and when a god disappeared, to many extent, was based on the movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars. Now, this here is a story called Gilgamesh. In the 19th century, British anthropologists and British archaeologists were digging through various parts of what is today modern-day Iraq. They found this stone tablet. Now, luckily for them, it had the language that the Sumerians used on one side and the language that the Greeks used on the other. And although the British did not understand the Sumerian language, they did understand the Greek. Here is a modern-day tale of the Epic of Gilgamesh. We're going to stop this for a minute. I think I need to turn up my sound. Let's try this again. Jiva.
「 Ankita Balaba Ki Anta Balasura
Now, this is the way that most of the stories would have been told in those days. A young person would be taught to play that instrument. They would be told the story, and then they would pass it on to future generations through a lyrical story, a story told in song. Now, of course, as that gentleman gets older, he will tell his son how to play the instrument and tell the story. And that is how our history sometimes has been related. Well, this is a good place for us to stop for today because we're about ready to run out of time and we need to do our 3 wow questions. I'd like to leave you though with a question of my own. I have been talking about anthropologists and archaeologists. Now, they are not the same thing. What I'd like for you to do on our next WOW worksheet, and that would be Friday, the 21st of August, is I'd like for you to write down the difference between an archaeologist and an anthropologist. Now, unfortunately, it's not in your book. If you were to look into your book, it would not be in the glossary or the appendix. However, I think if one was an industrious sort, they could Google anthropologists and Google archaeologists and find that there is a fundamental difference. So, be ready for that on Fridays. Wow. See you tomorrow.